Are you hearing kids?
It was fun.
No, volunteer citizens climate lobby. And then some other folks that are involved. Yeah. That's great. Thanks for joining us.
With you all soon.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
You
can figure that out.
So if you speak
I'm always getting it things simple. It's not.
Yeah, very good season.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's fine. Constructive.
Yeah.
Forgetfulness.
All right. Thank you all for coming. This is another installation of our ongoing Center for Science and Technology Policy Research seminar series, Noontime seminars. For folks that haven't yet plugged in, tuned into what we were doing here, you can check the website. We have talks about on a pace of once a week right now, apart from the spring break coming up at the end of this month. But we've got a nice host of speakers that represent many of the different facets of the center here, and also part of the wider series community. See, here we've got a distinguished professor with us today who's on sabbatical right now from the University of Nottingham. His name is Reiner Grundmann. He's professor of Science and Technology Studies. He has a long-standing interest in sustainability and global environmental problems. His research has explored the relationship between knowledge and decision-making, the role of expertise in public discourses, and comparative media analysis across countries and issues. He's been involved in many different projects and definitely is a strong representative of movements towards interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary engagement with these pressing 21st century environment and sustainability challenges. He's an author of numerous books and papers, including co-author of a Hartwell paper for reorientation of climate policy, and has been very active in a range of conversations from science, technology, and society, discussions of what constitutes expertise, to the sorts of things that we're going to hear from Reiner about today, around media coverage of climate change from a comparative perspective using corpus linguistics. Thank you very much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Max, for the kind introduction and invitation. I'm having a great time at Boulder. It's good to be back here. I gave a talk several years ago to a Rogers seminar on ozone politics and climate politics. And today it's about media coverage of climate change. So before I go into it, I want to show you, actually this is a slide I sneaked in after the slides were sent off to the technicians, so I hope the people who see that in the stream can make sense of it. So this is just a quote by Sir John Houghton, a British climate scientist who was very influential with the IPCC, co-chair and editor of the reports up to 2007, I think. And he summarizes a concern that many climate scientists have, as you can read there, that he thinks there is a war going on, and there is a problem of climate scientists not being very good at public relations management. So he thinks there needs to be more realistic intervention by people who can help climate scientists, because scientists usually are not very good at doing that kind of thing. So it's about a strategy in order to get the point across, in order to develop policy. So strategy, war, policy, it's all very latent and very serious words there. If you look at the context of this all, this has to do with a more recent attempt by people that say actually the science has a pretty strong consensus, but we don't see policy action. So this is the known as the 97% consensus theory, and that should translate ultimately into policy. So you see that familiar picture there. the linear model, you could call it downstream visions, that science somehow influences these things, and or at least that's how it should be. Well, these are already two questions. Is this an accurate representation of the policy process, and if so, should it be like that, or how could it be improved? Now you see, this is what the assumption is, that there should be some kind of policy outcome if you have the scientific consensus, but at least the public should be influenced, or the media should be influenced through that. So this is a very science-centered view of the policy process. If you look at the political science literature, STS literature, and so on, of course, they will tell you there are all these feedback loops, and there are more and more of them. I think I put them all in. And then, you know, this is a simplistic version of society. Where is art? Where is religion? Where is culture? So, and policy is treated as a dependent variable. Okay. Now, policy could also have feedback loops. If something goes wrong in the policy, politicians will be the first to say we need to change it. The public may not be convinced about things. So, treating that as purely dependent is not a good idea. So if you just look at this still very simplified picture, you get a very complex pattern of possible interactions, and it's not clear which of those would be in the driving seat. Separate question, which of those should be in the driving seat. So I hope these few remarks make clear that Sir John Houghton's concerns are of a very particular kind, and you will see about the empirical evidence at the end of the talk. Now, I've been interested in that kind of relation between climate science and the media for quite a long time, and published a paper in Environmental Politics in 2007, where the finding was that this was just a US-Germany comparison, that in these countries, the official climate policy seems to resonate with what the press says. Okay, so there was a sort of more skeptical tone in the US, and no visibility of skepticism in Germany, but more environmentally or climate policy oriented actions there. So there is this kind of puzzle. How could that happen if you have a global international effort called the IPCC and the United Nations process that then scatters out into different national policies? Similarly, Sheila Jasanoff said, if it's all about skeptical propaganda, why is it that some countries have different reactions to that? So they pick out different messages from climate science. So that is a sort of reason to look at comparative studies and do country comparisons. Now here's a bunch of research questions which should be asked, and there are many more. You see the quote there at the beginning, echoing Houghton's concern about strategic use of science in the media. We don't know very much about these questions with regard to climate. There is work being done, notably Max here, about these things, how news stories are produced and how influential they are. But what do people make with news? What is their news consumption, and to what purpose is this kind of news consumption put, politically speaking? So there is a lot of things that we don't know, and in this study we just looked at this last question there about what the news tells us about climate change in different countries. So it's a very limited question, and we don't answer any of the questions above. Why should we be doing comparative research? It occurred to me that there is actually very little. And this may have to do with the incentive structure of national research foundations. They are interested in their own country. The European Union, you might say, is different, but they, I don't know, it's probably fair to say that the comparative aspect is not academically developed. So they are keen to get people on board that come from different countries and from business and not only academia and so on, but they don't do genuine comparative work. So there needs to be a conscious effort to get things going in a comparative perspective. So these are the assumptions that you should be able to see differences in climate change discourses across countries, because that's where the action is. It's at least on a national level, it's probably also on a regional and local level, but we looked at these 4 countries, France, Germany, United Kingdom and United States. Now the picture you see there is my colleague and co-author Mike Scott, who is developing the software package Wordsmith, and you see there, you can Google for it. Has anyone come across corpus linguistics or has used it? No, okay, so fasten your seatbelts. It will be, well, it's not too technical, but so I should be able to show you the relevance of that method. It's computer-based, software-based analysis of large amounts of text. So you don't actually read the text. You download text, no sample. So the idea is to get a complete set of, let's say, articles from the United States, and you can specify which papers, which time period, and then analyze them. It allows you to see patterns in the text that you wouldn't be able to see by reading them. There is an influential publication by Craig Trumbull from the mid-90s, who says discourse analysis is all about aligning claims makers in the news with their frames or claims they have. So you want to put it very simply, you want to have people or organizations who say something. But this is very difficult to do in practice. So if you do qualitative work, you download text and sample some of them and you highlight them or use NVivo or whatever. With corpus linguistics, you have much more text available, but you can't search for frames because you only can search for words with that kind of software. So we are still quite some way away from achieving that kind of gold standard in analysis, so to speak. So we looked at LexisNexis 2000 to 2010, top 10 newspapers in 4 countries, and then we use tools that are usually applied through corpus linguistics, which is looking at frequency. So that's the first thing. Their concordance lines is the technical term. So you have a target term like climate change, and that would appear in the middle of a line, and so you could see the words that are accompanying that term left and right. For technical purposes, this is just to get counts of frequencies. Okay. Collocations are words that come with a specific term, that are closely aligned with it or glued to it, so to speak. Word clusters are word clusters, and keywords is about the salience of specific words compared to the expected frequency in a text. So that's if you would see unusual words, that's a statistical threshold built into it, and it throws up words that are highly unusual, for example, in a specific time period. I will give you examples later. So what we did was, first of all, building the corpus. So LexisNexis is fantastic in that it's free. If you are at a university, you get access to it. You can read many important papers without paying for it, or the day after. But it's a very shoddy database in terms of you don't know what's going on over time because it's proprietary and they change it. So if you do the same research a few months later, a few years later, nobody knows if the basis has changed or not. So ideally you would go to other archives that are more reliable. Okay, so that's a limitation in using LexisNexis. It also is, it contains many duplicates despite clicking on the box exclude duplicates. So having Mike on board as a co-author, he's able to write programs to make sure that you exclude duplicates for real. Okay, so all the files are broken down into single pieces and then aggregated at a monthly level. So you see the size is enormous, more than 100 million words for these 4 countries over 11 years, which is a big corpus. So just the summary information about the stories, you see the US had the least amount of coverage and the UK the most. Circulation of newspapers, of course, is also important. Where France has the lowest and the UK the most. And we use the relevant search phrases. I will show you what they were in each country. So you might think that's obvious. It's climate change, isn't it? But wait, yes, sure.
Sorry, I don't know. Can I ask you a question? Hi. So can you just explain? That's interesting that UK has so many compared to. So,
Yeah.
I mean, France and UK are what, similarly sized in population?
I think France is bigger.
Bigger, so that would even be. So when you say circulation, do you mean subscriptions that people have bought? Or
No, that's the information I think here. So this is the print run, official figures about how much of each paper is in circulation.
Okay.
So this was the criterion that we got those that were most sold, so to speak. And then they had to have a story in every year. There were various criteria, so they could make it into the top 10. So we make, LexisNexis has a number of own bias. If you just took LexisNexis, you would get a mess of data. You first of all need to break it down into country chunks that are comparable. So the logic applied would be the same for all 4 countries, and you see that is number of articles is around 50,000 on average in all countries. So you see what is included in the US and well, this is a few years back. I imagine the print run will have dropped again since that time. So monthly level data means you can do these attention spikes, and this is a fairly robust result. Max has his own under observatory, so there is always the question, is it 2007 or is it 2009 that is the highest peak? It's probably different in different countries, but you see Germany was by far the most reporting country in 2007, and it's the UK just before Germany, 2009, and France is even higher than the US there. So you see the different attention levels, and it goes up and down. You get early peaks in the UK. This is I think the G8 summit in Gleneagles. So there are explanations. The beauty about the method is you have the full text database, and you can always go and check and see if something explains a peak, for example. Now this is starts to get more interesting here. As I said, what are the words that are used in each country? Now, climate change, of course, is used in all countries. But starting with France, the most I don't know if you can see that at the back, the most frequently used term is effet de serre, which means greenhouse effect. This is the red line here. So this is consistently the most used term in the French press. Okay. In Germany, There is, of course, Klimawandel, which is climate change, the black line, so this is always the black line in all four graphs. But the green is topping it, and that's Klimaschutz, that's climate protection. This is something I didn't know. I've been reading about climate change for years, and I'm a German speaker, and I thought climatic catastrophe was the most commonly, well, it's very specific to Germany. It's also there, but you can't see it. It's not very prominent. So climate protection is the most used word in German press to describe that phenomenon. Now, the UK has climate change throughout. Interestingly, the US has global warming until about, it's very closely after 2007. So climate change makes a rise in 2009. That could simply be the fact that there's a lot of talk about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change or a climate change meeting of the parties. We don't know. And then it's again pretty much tied at the end of 2010. So the famous question, is there an intrinsically more alarming message in these words? So what can collocation analysis tell us about that? So these are the words that come with the target term, okay? So France, greenhouse effect, against, fight, lit is fight, and responsible. So it's a highly technical, you could say, term about greenhouse effect, which is laden with these political and moral concepts. Climate change, again, you have fight against. In Germany, climate change, looking just at climate change, you have fight against. In the UK, you have to tackle and against. I don't have to translate that. In the US, it's just it's just legislations. That is a sort of term that jumps at you. Now, the German term climate protection, Klimaschutz, one of the most frequent words there is contribution, Beitrag, making a contribution to protecting the climate. And then there is topic, environment, economy. Now with global warming, that's not a frequent term in Germany, but in France it's again fight against. In the UK it's a threat against and combat. And the US has again not very laden terms, except for combat that comes up with global warming. So it seems to be true what that old hunch was, I think, of Bush, that global warming is more associated with some kind of political agenda. We don't know, but that's, it's surprising that there is very little political moral connotation in the US, just some kind of legal hint. Now these are word clusters. So France, with the greenhouse effect, you see this is all linked to gases, to greenhouse gases. So I think the scientific meaning of greenhouse effect just means that there is a natural effect that would make the Earth much colder if it wasn't there. But so scientists were talking about an enhanced greenhouse effect, and this is what the French probably mean. So they refer to greenhouse gases there. Now there is a lot of fight against, Kampf and Lut in German and French. You see support to the previous analysis, contribution to, or to do more for climate protection in Germany. Now again, the UK, with global warming, there is effects and fight, impact, threat, dangers. In the US, it's effect, threat, fight. Global warming seems to be a bit more dramatic compared to climate change, which has the effects of climate change. That's as dramatic as it gets, or impacts. But that seems to be also the case in the UK. Okay, so moving on. Max has a book with that title, I think. Who Speaks for Climate? So this is the idea of finding out who are the claims makers. Now, this is done on the basis of a list that we compiled, and we asked colleagues and friends and peers who else should be included. And we do that for so-called advocates and so-called skeptics. I know this is simplistic, but some people have complained that they are on the advocates list. Someone from NASA. We can talk about that later. So 4 countries. On the left you see individuals, and on the right part of the table you see organizations. Now I just highlight the things that are probably most noteworthy. So Al Gore tops them all, and he is there in all 4 countries. No one else achieves that. Okay, so if you look at cross-national visibility, there is Miliband in the UK, very, very visible, much more than Al Gore, but not in the other countries. Well, not to some significant degree. Then there are German environment ministers that are visible only in Germany, and in France you see also politicians. Now, turning to the organizations there, you see Greenpeace, fairly visible but not in the US, WWF, Friends of the Earth, Germany and the UK. And then there are the Greens as a party, as a movement. So we searched for Die Grünen in German also. And because they are in parliament, they have been in government, this is a much bigger force compared to the other countries. Okay, now if you look at the skeptics, the only cross-national visible skeptic seems to be Michael Crichton, the late novelist. But look at the numbers, it's much down compared to the so-called advocates. There is this phenomenon of Claude Allègre in France, a scientist and one-time cabinet minister, I think. So you get very high counts for skepticism in France, probably due to one single person. Now, interestingly, if you look at the organizations on the right-hand side of the table, there are just the Cato Institute and the Heritage Foundation in the US that are mentioned frequently. We searched for a whole lot of others that were suggested in the literature that these are the climate skeptic think tanks, but they are not referred to in the press. So I don't know on what that is based, that are influential maybe behind the scenes, but you don't see it in the media reporting. So you see there is about 9 times as much skeptical reporting in the US compared to Germany, but that's only on the level of these organizations. If you look at the level of individuals, it's much more nuanced. So these are attention peaks. You see in the countries here from US, these are advocates on top. There's a different scale. 600 marks here and 90 for the skeptics. So you see there's a different dimension. And the French skeptical reference is around 2000, early 2010. So this may have been the time when, what was his name, the French famous skeptic made appearances, but this could be found out by going into the text. So this is just due to one person, and that person is no longer active after a while. You might say climate skepticism in France is not a big deal. So you need to be careful with what you make of the numbers. Now this is another interesting one. It shows you different groups. So advocates refers to individuals, green groups, of course, to parties and organizations, IPCC and so on. So you see here In France, you see individual advocates very visible in the mid-2000s, and the same happens in the US. But in Germany and in the UK, you get a lot of green group visibility, NGOs, so green groups are very much referred to in the press. So there is a big difference between France and the US on the one side and Germany and the UK on the other. So you could say there is more civil society involvement, more visibility of environmental pressure groups. Now this is the bit about keyword analysis. So as I said, this is a method to find out which of the words are unexpectedly frequent given a comparison corpus. So you could use a corpus of the English language. It needs to be a big corpus. We used our whole corpus, which is pretty big for these countries, and the results are broken down to the 5-year period before Copenhagen. The question is, do these countries show similar patterns in the run-up to the climate summit or not? So it starts with 2005 and ends in 2010, and the logic of coding was it's bold if it's visible in all countries, it's italics if it's visible in more than one country, and it's normal font if it's just for one country. So you see in 2005, this is what I previously called synchronization of discourses across borders. So you have Blair, Gleneagles, Kyoto and Katrina in all countries. Gleneagles was the G8 summit. And then you get things that are slightly different, and some politicians mentioned in one country but not in another. And so this is noteworthy. In 2005, you got a pretty much synchronized attention on similar events in these 4 countries. This is no longer the case the year after. 2006, there is nothing that unites these countries, so to speak. You get the word film, you can guess what that is. You get gore, you get original version here, subtitles, director in German, so this all refers to a specific movie. And you get Stern and Blair, and again I think in France you get Stern. So this is the Stern review, you don't get that in Germany or the US. 2007, only Bali, this was a COP summit I think, is visible in all 4 countries. So you know what the stories there, if you look at countries you know more about. So this is now going towards Copenhagen. 2008, presidential elections, right? So McCain is a highly unusual word in the whole corpus, okay? Also Obama, and also the word prix, which means price. So this is the French bit here. Preise, which means prices, prices. Food, it's to do with food prices, it's to do with biofuels. So there was a sort of synchronized discourse, perhaps across the world, at least across these 4 countries, that had to do with rising fuel prices due to biofuels. That would be the interpretation on that basis. Now 2009, Copenhagen and Obama are the only 2 that unite all 4 countries, but then you get cap and trade here, Miliband, the recession in the UK. Russia is a concern in Germany. This is within climate change articles, okay? And in France you see the word China. And in 2010 there is no more synchronizing going on. So you see at some points there is this interesting convergence of these discourses to come together, so you wouldn't be able to do that with a manual analysis, and you can probably do even more sophisticated things just using that technique. Okay, so what do we learn from this very brief run through the data analysis? Climate change discourses are in fact nationally specific. It starts with what is the word used to describe what we are talking about, which is not climate change in the translations into national languages, or not only. So you see France and Germany have completely different words. Furthermore, the connotations with these terms is different. Even with the term climate change can be meaning can be quite dramatic and moral in some countries, and rather neutral or at best legalistic, as we saw in the case of the US. The keyword analysis has shown that there is domestic policy issues always driving an agenda. So there are things that have to do with one country, and they probably use climate change as a hook to promote something that was going on already. So the climate change coverage is linked to something that's going on in the country. Now, advocates are more visible than skeptics by a large number. Now, I have to say, my article in 2007 in Environmental Politics, this was based on a similar assumption that is shared probably with John Houghton and others. At the time, I thought climate scientists are the most important people in public discourse, and therefore you should find them in the press. Once you include politicians, the picture changes completely, and you realize reference is made to politicians, not to climate scientists. But this is a big piece of important information that should be taken on board. Now, of course, we have only looked for people we know, so we had a list. This is not sort of the gold standard of corpus linguistics, which would be really corpus driven. You would go through the texts and see who are important people. We had a preconceived idea, so we may still be missing out on people that were not on our list. Leonardo DiCaprio, who knows? Or the Pope. There are unexpected claims makers and spokespeople in the press. Now, in terms of cross-national visibility, Al Gore is the only one, and you probably all know what kind of effort went into that. That's not just media picking out one person, but there was a campaign underlying it. But you couldn't see it in the terms of green parties that we were searching for. So there was another grassroots campaigning going on, and that paid off in increased visibility. So the UK and Germany has a lot of reference to traditional green groups, you could say. France and the US don't. Now, there is, of course, lots of things to improve. First of all, updating, but it takes an enormous amount of time to download and clean the text. So the 5 years after that period should be done. How could you link claims makers to frames? That's still an ongoing methodological issue. But there should be progress on the side of claims makers. There are software programs that can tease out named entities. So there is one at Stanford that's very good and established. So this would give you, again, without reading the text, a list of actors that are prominent by frequency. So you would find the Pope if the Pope was frequently mentioned at some time. Now, the bigger picture, how much does climate change tell us about other things if we use that kind of methodology? So we should not only compare countries, we should compare cases if we want to know more about that interaction between science, the public, politics, and the media, and so on. We started work on austerity. The austerity discourse just in the UK. So we had the pilot project and I gave a conference presentation in September. One of the striking things is, so this is another global crisis, you could say, an imminent crisis it was, or could be again. So you would like to see some expertise, but there are no scientists visible in the media. Austerity discourse is completely driven by politicians, and there is virtually no reference to economists. Economic science is not there. Okay, so this is a big difference to climate change. So this raises the question, what about other issues that are important and where knowledge plays a big role? You know, what is normal, so to speak? So the assumption again by John Houghton at the beginning, this seems to be making a lot of assumptions about how the policy process works and what is the normal or expected mechanism in that process. So Mark's famous article about journalistic norms, about false symmetry. We don't know what happened there. We would need to do interviews. You can't do that through corpus methods. You need to find out what are journalistic practices and are they changing over time? Are they different in different media? Are they different in different countries? So in Germany, this didn't seem to apply at any point. There was just no mentioning of skeptical voices. And there is not a homegrown sort of visible community that is referred to. Never was. So it's not a legitimate discourse in Germany. So it's a very different political culture. And that, you know, that would translate into journalists not stirring that up because you know, it wouldn't occur to them. Why should they create a balance now if it's not an issue and not seen as important? Now, of course, we don't know what people do with that information. So the fact that we have these statistics, you could say on average, this tells you about, you know, exposure. But do people read these articles? Probably not. Do they read headlines? Do they listen to friends who tell them something? You wouldn't find out through corpus. Also, I should say, you don't know if the mentioning of a name or a term is meant seriously or ironically or cynically. You can't find that out. Well, at least not easily. So, but it gives you a measure of attention. So this is something Alan Maser, for example, has been arguing for a long time, the quantity of news coverage theory. So the more it is in the news, the more people realize, oh, there's something going on, that's probably important. So it doesn't matter if it's what slant it has. As long as there is a lot of reporting, maybe controversial, people know there is something there, which I probably should know more about, but I don't have the time or the ability to read. Social media is another big neglected point here. So I know Mike Schaefer has done some work on that. Does social media operate differently to the mainstream press? Echo chambers, don't people always buy the paper where they think this is what I want to read because I hate Trump or, you know, whatever political alignments there are? So you don't want to be exposed to something that is against your cognitive modus operandi. So it could be similar, but the introduction of social media means that mainstream media seems to be operating in a different way because there are constraints on mainstream media, resource shortages, and so on. At the same time, people just posting things that sometimes are picked up by mainstream media. So there is news production coming from the grassroots, so to speak. So that's another piece of research for the future. Okay, I think I'll leave it there.
Okay.
Thanks for your attention.
We've got 10 or 15 minutes for questions. Jerry?
I was particularly interested in your analogy to austerity policies. Let's try this, that austerity policies are to climate policies as economic threats are to climate threats. Both are anticipation of threats. They're on different time scales. But does this analogy hold in your analysis?
Well, we didn't analyze it on that level, but I wouldn't say, that's an interesting point about the time scales, because we could say the economic threat was imminent.
That's right.
Whereas the climate threat was distant.
Right.
And the climate threat wouldn't exist if not for scientists who say, if we carry on like we are doing now, we will have a big problem. So in terms
everyday
of
experience speaks to the economic threat of austerities.
what do you mean by that?
The individual knows the impact of austerity programs. For climate change, the individual has to trust climate models.
I think modeling is involved in both. The interesting point that
No, experience.
yeah, well, for the so-called lay people, yes. But I mean, there is the broader issue of economic crisis, which is associated to that. So if you think about this as being an important policy issue, you could say economic crisis is felt by people there and then. So climate change is a lot. The debate is a lot about do we see weather extremes now that are already related to climate change or not, or is it entirely a future phenomenon? But economic crisis you would experience, and austerity is a sort of policy to address it. But models are central in both fields of policy making, right? So they all rely on models. But I think the difference is the time horizon and the, how could you put that? The fact that climate science seems to be so more visible has to do with investment. So we have made a commitment in terms of resource investment in a specific kind of research, which isn't done in economics, for the better or worse. So imagine we would have spent billions on economic modeling, with economists promising every year the models will get better and so on. We know they haven't achieved it, but who knows with climate change? The test has to come.
Perhaps the way to deal with this is differential calculus. The rate of change of threat as time progresses, and if your building's on fire, you know what to do.
Yeah.
But you're not quite so sure what to do when that derivative gets to be too small.
Yeah, it's about salience, yes.
Yeah.
I agree. Max?
It'll have to be somewhere.
I guess I was just still thinking a little bit about where you began. You were lamenting LexisNexis, right? The universe from which you're pulling all this information is proprietary, it's a commercial enterprise. Can you talk a little bit about how that may limit social science inquiry in these areas broadly, and then also talk about a different future, if you see it as feasible to imagine, achieve a different way of building up such a database, building up such a clearinghouse of information so that better research can be done?
Well, I think given what the constraints are, we have done probably a pretty good job realizing what the defects are with Nexus. So with all that, breaking it down to the country level and applying the same logic in terms of sampling. I don't know. I mean, as long as you have papers that are commercial and companies that use that in terms of a sort of second layer marketing, it can be done better or worse. I don't know if, which lobby group could say you should be doing a better job, you should be accountable for the changes at least. So someone can say, I can see a reason why this is all now different because they changed an algorithm or they unsubscribe papers. Even that information is not easily available if the paper drops out of their archive or comes in. So the alternative is to go to even more proprietary, so to the original sources, and there you have to make deals and ask, we want a download of 10 years, how much would it cost? And, for academics, they are usually giving you a fair price, but you can't, you have to sign that you can't use any of that for any kind of reproduction. I think theoretically also with LexisNexis, because of course the fear is that you produce a DVD with the archive, okay? Even if it's only for one topic, which is I think not a real threat, but what did I want to say about the? So you need to get to sources that are reliable, where the archive exists and this can be checked all the time. So then you would have, but this would limit you, because not all papers will have that easily available, even in this day and age where everything could be online. So I don't know if universities could say, look, we are paying you this much and we are the main customer, and you should do a better job.
Take that up as a social movement to improve LexisNexis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, there need to be some voices saying these are the limitations, and maybe that could be fixed at relatively little cost. I don't know.
Good question.
Yeah.
So, you said global warming was more associated with aggressive words like fight or combat, and climate change is more associated with less aggressive words like cope. Do you think one word is more effective than the other at changing behaviors?
No, I don't think you can change behavior in that way. So that would be an additional box in that downstream model. So you go from policy to behavior. That's even more difficult and complicated. But if you look at the different words we had there, where is it? This is the key words. This is different in different countries, right? Now we need to go to the view.
The way I see it is global warming kind of is more emotionally attached, I guess. It kind of would, it strikes more fear if you're saying fight global warming,
But
combat global warming.
Well, yes, but it's it seems to be different in different countries, right?
Yeah.
So it's true in this analysis. So this is the collocations. These are the words that come close in a sentence to the word global warming, to the term global warming or climate change. And so in the USA you get combat, which is a sort of political term, but with global warming, not with climate change. But this is a very limited piece of information. It tells you something about the other countries. But it doesn't, if you want to go in a deeper argument about it, people will tell you global warming is about average increase in temperatures, so it's a limited term. That's one interpretation. Climate change is about many changes that could be dangerous, to which someone else might reply, climate change is natural, has always happened. So it's a more neutral term. So I don't think you will get anywhere on the basis of intrinsic meaning. You just can study what does the word in use mean? What meaning is normally generated by that? And so it's useful to look across countries and see that there is this huge variety. And some countries in effect have a more political and moral meaning attached to it compared to others.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Reiner. All right, thank you all for coming. Our next talk is in a week, Wednesday the 16th.